You're listening to Family Shadows, stories of fathers, families, and the ties that hold and sometimes break. If this story moves you, consider subscribing so these voices never fade. Today's story is called, "I Raised Her as My Own, Then She Said I Wasn't Her Real Dad." I have lived 63 years on this earth, and I thought I'd learned how to carry most things quietly. Grief, disappointment, the subtle aches of age. You learn to tuck them away like folded letters in a desk drawer, there but no longer touched. I thought fatherhood, at least the kind I'd practiced for the past 2 decades, was one of those certainties I could count on. I was wrong. The day it happened was a late summer afternoon. The air was warm but heavy, carrying the scent of the azaleas Emily had insisted on planting along the walkway. I'd been up early, the way I always am on her birthday. 25 years old today. In my mind's eye, she was still the small, frightened 6-year-old I'd first met. Hair tangled, eyes darting, holding a stuffed bear by the arm as though it could keep her from falling apart. We were hosting a family gathering in the backyard. David, my son, had strung lights from the maple to the back porch, and the grill was already going. A dozen relatives milled about, balancing paper plates, laughing, clinking glasses. I'd baked her favorite cake myself, a chocolate layer with raspberry filling, the way Linda used to make it. I'd even found the same frosting recipe she'd kept scribbled on a yellowing index card in our kitchen drawer. When I brought the cake out, the candles flickered in the soft breeze. I set it down on the table in front of Emily. "Happy birthday, kiddo," I said. The word kiddo had been mine for her since the first week she moved in, a term that made her eyes light up back then. She smiled politely at first, the kind of smile you give a coworker you barely know. Then someone, maybe her cousin, asked for a speech. It was harmless, just the way families do when they've had a few drinks and too much sun. Emily stood up, glass in hand. She thanked everyone for coming, thanked her family for supporting her through the years. And then it came. She looked around the table, her gaze passing over me so quickly I thought I imagined it. Then, with a little laugh, she said, "Of course, I'm grateful to everyone here, especially my real family. You know, the people who have been there since the beginning." The air thinned around me. Conversation stopped. Even the grill seemed to go quiet. I don't remember if I kept smiling. My hands found each other in my lap, fingers lacing and unlacing. Real family, she hadn't said it by accident. Her eyes had drifted toward Sarah, her mother's sister, who was grinning faintly, sipping her wine. I didn't speak. Not then. I've always believed that a father's dignity is in his restraint, but inside, something old and fragile cracked. 20 years of mornings making her lunch. Late-night drives to fetch her from a party she didn't want her friends to know about. Tuition checks, doctor visits. The whispered comfort of telling her she was safe when storms rattled her window. All of it suddenly weightless, as though it could be erased by one line in a birthday toast. David caught my eye from across the yard. His jaw was set. He'd heard it too. The rest of the afternoon blurred. I remember people singing, though it sounded thinner than it had in years past. I remember Emily blowing out the candles without making a wish, then cutting herself a thin slice and leaving the rest untouched. I stayed mostly at the edge of the crowd, clearing plates, refilling drinks, doing what fathers do when they've been made invisible. They keep moving so no one sees them disappear. After the guests trickled out, I stood in the kitchen with my hands in the soapy water, staring out the window at the lawn chairs still scattered under the maple. The lights David had strung swayed in the evening breeze. From the living room came the sound of Emily laughing with Sarah, their voices rising and falling like waves I was no longer allowed to swim in. I dried my hands slowly, sat down at the table and listened. I don't know what I was listening for, an apology, an acknowledgement, maybe just the sound of my own name in her voice. It never came. Instead, I heard Sarah say, "Well, at least now you can focus on your real roots. Blood's thicker, always has been." Emily didn't answer, or maybe she did and I just didn't want to hear it. When they finally left, I walked to the den. In the corner stood the old cedar chest Linda and I had bought when we first married. It smelled faintly of lavender and cedar oil. Inside were pieces of a life, photos, her wedding dress, Emily's adoption papers, school art projects with glitter still clinging to the glue. I pulled out the manila folder labeled Emily, Adoption and Medical. On top was the very first receipt, a deposit for her preschool dated March 2005. My handwriting was on the check stub. I sat there for a long time, flipping through the years in paper form. Kindergarten, ballet lessons, orthodontist bills. The first laptop she needed for high school, each one a piece of a story I thought we were writing together. I realized with a heaviness that settled into my bones that she might never read it the same way. By the time the house was quiet, it was past midnight. I made myself a cup of tea and stood in the doorway to the backyard. The air had cooled. I thought of Linda again, her voice low and certain, the night we signed the final adoption papers. She's ours now, Mike. No matter what comes, she's ours. Back then, I'd believed love was the strongest glue in the world. That night, I started to wonder if love could be erased, simply because someone decided to pretend it wasn't there. The thing about moments like this is that they don't explode, they sink. Slowly, quietly. You don't feel the break until you realize you've been standing in pieces. I knew something had shifted that afternoon. I just didn't yet know how far it would take us from each other, or that one day I'd be forced to hold those pieces up for her to see, whether she wanted to or not. The morning after her birthday, the house was too still. Even the coffee pot seemed to take longer to brew, its slow percolation filling the kitchen with the smell of burnt beans. I poured a cup and sat at the table where, just 24 hours before, we'd placed the cake. There was still a faint smudge of frosting on the tablecloth, a raspberry-colored stain like a bruise no one had bothered to clean. I didn't look at my phone. I didn't expect a message from her. The thing about being a father, especially to a child you've chosen, not one you've created, is that you measure love in the tiny, unremarkable moments. That's what Linda and I had learned. You can't buy their trust with a birthday gift. You build it, piece by piece, in lunches packed before sunrise, in the midnight drives to the pharmacy for cough syrup, in the quiet applause from the stands when they nail a free throw. I could still see that first day like it had been pressed into my mind with ink. The courthouse had smelled faintly of old books and bleach, the kind of scent that makes you feel like you're in a place where decisions matter. Linda sat next to me, her hand looped through my arm, eyes locked on the small figure sitting in a chair across the room. Emily had been wearing a dress one size too big, a faded denim thing with buttons missing, and her shoes didn't match. She clutched a brown teddy bear to her chest, its fur matted, one ear hanging by a thread. When the social worker called us over, Emily didn't look up. Linda crouched down in front of her the way you might approach a skittish animal. "Hi, sweetheart," she'd said. Emily's knuckles were white around the bear's arm. I remember kneeling too, lowering myself so we were at eye level. "That's a fine bear you've got there," I'd said. "What's his name?" She mumbled something. I had to lean in to catch it. "Benny." "Well, Benny," I said, "how about you and your friend come home with us for a while? We've got a room with a window that catches the morning sun and a kitchen that smells like pancakes on Saturdays." She glanced at me for the first time, just a flicker, but it was enough for me to know I'd spend the rest of my life trying to earn that look again. We signed the papers that day. They told us it might take a while for her to settle in. They told us she'd have questions about her real parents as she grew older. I nodded, already deciding that my job wasn't to replace anyone. It was to be present, steady, a place she could land no matter where she'd been. That first week, she wouldn't sleep in her own room. Every night around midnight, we'd hear the soft pad of her feet down the hall. She'd stand in our doorway, silent, until Linda lifted the blanket and said, "Come on, kiddo." She'd crawl in between us, clutching Benny, and breathe in those slow, shaky breaths until sleep took her. I learned then that fatherhood wasn't in the big gestures. It was in the patience to let a scared little girl feel safe again. Over the years, I watched her grow into herself. She loved to draw. The kitchen table was often littered with colored pencils and paper, half-finished sketches of animals, flowers, sometimes faces she wouldn't explain. I'd keep a small corkboard in my office just for her art, swapping out pieces every month. When she was 8, she asked to take ballet lessons. We couldn't really afford it, not with David heading into high school, but Linda took on extra shifts at the library, and I picked up weekend handyman jobs. Every Saturday I'd drive her to the studio, watch her disappear into a sea of pink leotards, then sit in the car with a paperback waiting. The last recital she danced in, she spotted me in the crowd and grinned so wide I thought my heart might split. And then Linda got sick. It started small, fatigue, a cough that lingered, but within months we were in and out of hospitals. I was juggling work, David's college applications, and Emily's school schedule. She was 12 when I first had to tell her in the gentlest way I could that her mom might not get better. She cried in my arms, clutching my shirt until the fabric was wet through. On Linda's last night, Emily sat beside her bed, reading aloud from a book they loved. Linda reached for my hand and whispered, "She's ours now, Mike. Promise me no matter what." I promised. After the funeral, I threw myself into being there for Emily. I didn't remarry. I didn't date. My life became work, David's occasional visits, and Emily's milestones. First high school dance, first heartbreak, first time she asked for the car keys and stayed out past curfew. I grounded her for a week, then caved after 3 days when she slid a plate of chocolate chip cookies in front of me without a word. It wasn't perfect. We had arguments over grades, over the friends she chose, over the way she'd sometimes vanish into her phone for hours. But I thought that was normal. I thought we were us, until I began to notice Sarah's shadow. Her mother's sister had been around in the early years, dropping by now and then with birthday cards or small gifts. But as Emily got older, Sarah's visits grew more frequent. She'd take Emily to lunch or shopping or to meet some cousins you should know. One evening, I overheard them in the kitchen. Sarah was saying, "Your mom's side is your real family, Em. You'll see. The older you get, the more you'll want to know your roots." Emily didn't argue. I stepped back into the hallway before they could see me, a knot forming in my chest. I told myself she was just curious. Everyone wants to know where they come from, but I couldn't shake the fear that the years Linda and I had poured into her might be, if not erased, at least diminished in her heart. And maybe that was the beginning of the crack that, years later, would split wide open in front of everyone. There's a truth about parenting they don't write in any manual. The moment you take a child into your arms, the world stops caring about paperwork. It doesn't matter whether the ink on an adoption certificate has dried or whether blood connects you. In the quiet spaces, over late-night fevers, forgotten science projects, and the long drives home after bad days, you form something that no pen or judge could manufacture. With Emily, the legal part was a formality. Yes, there was a court decree, a stamped document that declared I was her father in the eyes of the state. But in my eyes, in Linda's eyes, I had become her father long before that signature. That's why I never once called her my adopted daughter. I hated the way that adjective clipped her name like a warning label. She was simply Emily, my daughter, my kiddo. Linda and I talked about it once, late at night, a year or so after Emily came to live with us. We were sitting at the kitchen table, the kind of hour when the house felt wrapped in a hush you could almost hear. She was sipping chamomile tea, her hair loose around her shoulders. "You know," she said, "we're never going to have to explain to her why she's ours. She's just going to know it because we'll have lived it." And I believed her. So I poured myself into living it. There wasn't a single bill or responsibility I didn't shoulder if it meant she could have what other kids took for granted. School trips, soccer cleats, orthodontics, private tutoring when math became a battlefield. I kept records, though not because I thought I'd ever need them. Old habit, I guess, from years of running my own contracting business. Receipts tucked into manila folders, copies of checks stapled to invoices. I had a drawer in my desk labeled Household Kids, and under that were 2 subfolders, one for David, one for Emily. It wasn't about proving anything. It was about being organized. Or maybe it was my way of preserving the story of how we built her life, line by line. When she was 10, I remember driving through a snowstorm to pick her up from a sleepover because she'd called in a whisper saying she didn't feel well. By the time I reached the house, her face was pale, her hands cold. I carried her out to the truck, wrapped in my coat. We didn't talk much, just the hum of the heater and the steady rhythm of snow against the windshield. At home, I made her soup, sat with her until she fell asleep on the couch, and later moved her to bed without waking her. No signature on a paper could tell you that was fatherhood. By the time she reached high school, she developed a streak of independence that both worried and impressed me. She had friends I'd never met, places she went without offering details. But she also had moments where she'd curl up in the living room with me, watching old movies, laughing at the same parts Linda used to. Those were the times I thought maybe, just maybe, I was doing this right. Then came the college years. She'd been accepted to a university out of state, expensive but prestigious. I told her we'd make it work. I took on more jobs, cut back on things for myself. I remember sitting at my desk one night, calculator in hand, trying to figure out how to cover the dorm fees. The house was quiet except for the sound of her typing away in her room, probably working on an application essay. And I remember thinking, this is worth it. Every late night, every dollar, worth it. She never knew about the second mortgage I took to keep her there, and I never planned to tell her. It was during those college years that Sarah's presence began to grow heavier again. Emily would come home for the holidays, but she often spent more time at Sarah's than at our house. I didn't want to push. I told myself it was natural for her to explore that side of her family. One Christmas, she brought Sarah to our dinner table. I welcomed her because that's what Linda would have done. But I noticed how Emily's stories and laughter seemed to bend in Sarah's direction, as though the two of them shared a private script I hadn't been given. Still, I didn't let it change my role. I paid her tuition on time. I covered the cost of her summer abroad program in Europe. I replaced her laptop when it crashed during finals week. I didn't ask for thanks. I didn't keep score, at least not then. The idea of keeping score felt wrong. Love wasn't an invoice. But looking back now, I see how those files in my desk, those neatly labeled folders with dates and amounts, were quietly filling with evidence. Not evidence I meant to use as a weapon, but as a history of what love had looked like in my house. And maybe that's what made the words she spoke at her birthday cut so deep. She didn't just forget the legal paper that had made me her father. She forgot the unwritten contract, the one we'd been signing without pens or witnesses every day for 20 years. The contract that said, "You are my child, I am your father, and nothing, no bloodline, no whisper in your ear can change that." It was the only agreement that ever truly mattered to me, and somehow it was the one she no longer recognized. You can always tell when a conversation isn't meant for you. It's not just the hushed voices, or the way laughter cuts short when you enter the room. It's the quick flicker in someone's eyes, the tiny pause before they decide what part of the truth you're allowed to hear. With Sarah, those pauses became a language of their own. The first time I caught it, Emily was 17. We were at a 4th of July barbecue at my brother's place. The air was thick with the smell of grilled corn and charcoal, kids running barefoot in the grass, sparklers fizzing in the twilight. I was standing near the picnic table, setting out paper plates, when I noticed Emily off to the side with Sarah. They were sitting close, heads bent, voices low. Every so often, Sarah would lean in, her hand resting lightly on Emily's arm, her expression that mix of sympathy and persuasion I'd seen her wear before. I couldn't hear the words, but I didn't need to. The tilt of Emily's head, the way she nodded slowly, told me Sarah was planting seeds. When they noticed me watching, Sarah gave a bright, airy smile as if nothing in the world could be more innocent. Emily looked away. I let it go. That's what I told myself anyway. In truth, I tucked the moment into that private drawer in my mind where I kept all the little things I didn't know how to fix. Over the years, the whispers grew bolder. Sarah started showing up to school events, choral concerts, art shows, always arriving early enough to claim the seat beside Emily. Sometimes she'd bring small gifts, a charm bracelet, a pair of earrings wrapped in pastel tissue. Emily wore them proudly, never noticing or never caring that I was sitting a row behind, holding flowers I'd bought on my way there from work. Family gatherings became trickier. At Thanksgiving, Sarah would steer Emily into the kitchen to help with the pies, and when they emerged half an hour later, Emily's laughter had that private edge again. At Christmas, Sarah's presents were always lavish. Designer coats, expensive handbags, and Emily's thank yous to her were warmer, longer than the polite hug she'd give me before moving on. I wanted to believe I was imagining it. That's the cruel part about doubt. It makes you suspicious of your own eyes. One Sunday afternoon, I was fixing a leak under the kitchen sink when I heard them in the living room. Emily was home from college for the weekend. Sarah had dropped by just to catch up. I stayed quiet, the clink of my wrench against the pipe masked by their voices. "He means well," Emily was saying, her tone hesitant. "I'm sure he does," Sarah replied. "But you've got to think about your future, Em. One day you might want to know more about where you come from, who you really are." "I know who I am," Emily said, but her voice wavered. "That's good," Sarah said smoothly. "Still, it's different when you have your real family in the picture, people who share your blood." Something in me tightened, a coil pulled too far. I put down the wrench, wiped my hands, and stood in the doorway. "Emily," I said, keeping my voice steady, "could you give me a hand for a second?" Sarah turned her head, that same bright, harmless smile on her lips. "Oh, we're just talking, Mike." "I can see that," I said, "but I need to borrow my daughter for a minute." Emily glanced between us, then followed me into the kitchen. I showed her the leak under the sink, though it was already fixed. She knew it too. "You okay?" she asked. "I'm fine," I said. "I just wanted to make sure you're hearing your own voice in there, not someone else's." She frowned. "I can think for myself, Dad." "I know you can," I said. "I just don't ever want you to forget how you got here. Who's been here?" She didn't answer. She went back to the living room, and I heard them start talking again. I told myself then that I could outlast Sarah's influence. That the years Linda and I had poured into Emily were stronger than any whisper. But love, I've learned, doesn't always drown out the voices that tell you it's not enough. And sometimes, the people you love most are the ones who lean in to listen. There are seasons in life you only recognize for their perfection once they are gone. The years when Linda was still here were like that, ordinary in the living, golden in the remembering. Our house was nothing special from the outside. White siding that needed repainting, a porch with a loose board I kept meaning to fix, a patchy lawn that refused to grow no matter how much I coaxed it. But inside, it was the kind of home that held warmth in its walls. There was always something on the stove, music in the background, sometimes the radio tuned to old country ballads, sometimes Emily practicing her spelling words aloud while Linda hummed. Emily had been with us for less than a year when Linda decided to paint her bedroom. "Every girl needs a space that feels like hers," she said, standing in the doorway with her arms folded, surveying the pale beige walls. Emily chose lavender. I remember the two of them at the hardware store. Linda crouched beside her in the paint aisle, holding up swatches while Emily squinted thoughtfully. We spent the weekend transforming that room. Linda and Emily painted while I handled the latter work. By Sunday night, the room glowed soft and inviting, the scent of fresh paint mingling with the sugar cookies Linda had baked as a reward. Emily slept there that night without asking to come into our room for the first time. Linda had a way of making milestones feel like celebrations, no matter how small. She marked the first day of each school year with pancakes shaped like the number of Emily's new grade. She kept a drawer full of scrapbooking supplies, filling albums with ticket stubs, pressed flowers, and photos. Emily's first lost tooth, her first soccer game, the time she built a snowman taller than herself. I remember one summer afternoon when Emily was about 9. We'd set up a sprinkler in the backyard, and she was running through it in her swimsuit, shrieking with laughter. Linda sat on the porch steps with a glass of lemonade, watching her with a smile so full I could feel it in my chest. She glanced at me and said, "Look at her, Mike. That's joy, that's what we're here for." We didn't talk much about the absence of Emily's biological parents. It wasn't something Linda believed needed to define her. "She's ours," Linda would say simply, as if the truth were that clear, that undeniable. And in our house it was, even during the hard years. When money was tight, when David's teenage rebellion tested us, when I was pulling double shifts, Linda never let the sense of us slip. She'd leave little notes in my lunch bag, a heart drawn next to my name. She'd keep Emily involved in everything from baking bread to planting flowers, as if each shared task was another stitch in the fabric of our family. When Linda first fell ill, Emily was 12. The doctors ran tests, then more tests, their voices careful and measured. We didn't tell Emily the full truth right away, only that Mom was sick and needed rest. But kids know. They feel the tremors in the ground before the quake. One night, Emily crawled into our bed again, something she hadn't done in years. She lay between us, silent, her small hands gripping Linda's. I remember lying there in the dark, listening to Linda's breathing, feeling the weight of both of them beside me and thinking, I would carry this for you if I could. As Linda's illness progressed, Emily became her little helper, fetching water, reading to her, brushing her hair. Linda would smile at me over Emily's head, her eyes saying more than words could. She knew our time was shortening. She knew I'd have to finish the work we'd begun together. On Linda's last morning, the sun came through the bedroom curtains in soft bands. Emily was curled in the chair by the bed, a book in her lap, reading in a voice just above a whisper. Linda reached out to touch her cheek. "You've got your whole life ahead, sweetheart," she said, "and you've got the best man I know to guide you through it." Her hand found mine then, fingers weak but certain. "She's ours now, Mike. Promise me, no matter what." I promised. That night after we'd said goodbye, I stood in the quiet kitchen, the clock ticking like a metronome in the stillness. I thought of every note Linda had written, every small celebration she'd orchestrated, every moment she'd reinforced the bond we'd built, and I swore I would protect that bond like a living thing. I would be father and mother. I would be her anchor, her safety net, her home. I believed that if I held to that promise tightly enough, nothing could loosen it. I didn't know then how wrong I could be. It didn't happen in a single moment. If it had, maybe I would have seen it coming. Maybe I would have braced for the blow. But distance between people has a way of sneaking in like fog. You wake up one morning and realize you can't see the familiar shapes you've always counted on. After Linda was gone, Emily and I clung to each other at first. We moved around the house like two people learning to walk again, leaning on each other for balance. I made her breakfast every morning, drove her to school even when she said she could take the bus. She'd sit on the counter while I cooked, swinging her legs, telling me about her day. But as the months passed, little changes crept in. She stopped sitting on the counter, stopped eating breakfast at the table. I told myself it was just her growing up, finding her independence. That's what kids do, right? They push away so they can stand on their own. Still, it stung. By the time she was 15, she spent more time in her room than with me. The door was often shut. Music I didn't recognize seeped through the walls. She started answering questions with one-word replies, her voice flat, eyes somewhere else. I tried to reach her in small ways, slipping a gas card into her purse when she got her learner's permit, showing up to every school event even when she told me not to make a fuss. Sometimes she'd smile, and for a second I'd see the little girl who used to run to me after school. Other times my efforts slid right past her, unnoticed. Sarah's visits became more frequent during those years. At first, it was just a lunch here, a shopping trip there. But then there were weekends Emily spent at her place, coming home with stories about cousins I'd never met, family photos where I was nowhere to be found. One evening, I was in the garage fixing a loose hinge on the door when I heard the crunch of tires on the driveway. Emily got out of Sarah's car, her arms full of shopping bags. She was laughing, her face lit up in a way I hadn't seen in months. I wanted to be happy for her. I wanted to believe joy was joy, no matter where it came from. But when she caught sight of me, the laughter faded and there was an awkward pause before she said, "Hi, Dad," like she just remembered I was there. We stood in the driveway for a moment, the air between us thick with something unspoken. I asked how her day was. "Fine," she said and walked inside. I told myself not to be jealous, but that's the thing about love. You don't want to compete for it, but when you feel it slipping away, you can't help but notice who it's drifting toward. By her senior year of high school, the distance was undeniable. She still lived under my roof, still ate at my table, but our conversations felt like small talk with a stranger. I'd ask about her plans for the weekend, and she'd tell me they were already made. I'd try to tell her about my day at work, and she'd nod politely, eyes flicking to her phone. The night she got her college acceptance letter, I was waiting in the living room when she came home. She burst through the door, waving the envelope, her voice high with excitement. I stood to hug her, but before I could, she was already on the phone with Sarah. I heard her say, "I got in. Can you believe it? We have to celebrate." We, not we, her and me. We, her and Sarah. That celebration happened without me. She told me later, as if it were an afterthought, that Sarah had taken her out for dinner to mark the occasion. I smiled and said that was nice, and I meant it, at least partly. But when she went to her room, I sat there in the living room with the acceptance letter in my hands, wondering how I'd somehow become an extra in my own story. The first year she was away at college, I called every Sunday. At first, she answered eagerly enough. We'd talk about her classes, her roommates, the coffee shop she liked near campus. But slowly the calls grew shorter. Sometimes she wouldn't pick up at all, texting later to say she'd been busy. I drove up to visit once in the fall, surprising her. I took her to lunch, asked if she needed anything. She said she was fine, but I noticed the worn straps on her backpack, the way she hesitated before ordering the cheapest thing on the menu. So after I dropped her off, I went to the bookstore and bought her the new laptop she'd been hinting about months earlier. I left it outside her dorm room with a note, "Proud of you, kiddo, Dad." She texted a thank you, no heart emoji, no exclamation points, just 2 words. It was around then that I started hearing from mutual acquaintances that she'd been spending holidays with Sarah's side of the family. I wasn't angry, at least, that's what I told myself. But I noticed how those gatherings seemed to replace the ones we'd once had. Christmas dinner at my house turned into me sending a package to whatever address she was staying at. And yet, even as the gap between us widened, I never stopped being her father in the ways that mattered. I paid her tuition on time, covered the cost of her summer courses, sent grocery money without her asking. Each payment was a quiet reaffirmation of that promise I'd made to Linda. But promises can be lonely things when you're the only one keeping them. I didn't realize it then, but the drift between us wasn't just about distance or growing up. It was about the quiet accumulation of moments where we stopped choosing each other. And once enough of those moments pile up, the foundation starts to give. I told myself there would be time to fix it. After graduation, we'd sit down, just the 2 of us, and talk the way we used to. I'd remind her of all the little threads that tied us together. I didn't know the conversation we were heading toward wouldn't be about repair. It would be about reckoning. It came in the mail on a Tuesday. I'd been out back trimming the hedges when the postman pulled up, his usual wave half hidden behind a stack of envelopes. Inside, I set the mail on the kitchen counter, sorting through bills and catalogs until my fingers landed on a thick, cream-colored envelope. The weight of it told me what it was before I even saw the return address: Emily Harris and Daniel Whitmore. For a moment, I just stood there, staring at the elegant script of her name. It felt strange, seeing it paired with someone else's, as though the world had already shifted into a version where she belonged to another family. I poured myself a cup of coffee before opening it, maybe to steady my hands, maybe because I wasn't sure what I'd feel when I did. The invitation was beautiful, calligraphy, embossed edges, the kind of thing that looked like it belonged in a magazine spread. The details were precise. The date in early June, a vineyard 3 towns over, a list of ceremony and reception times. Then my eyes caught on one line. The bride will be escorted down the aisle by. The space was blank. No by her father. No by Michael Harris. Just empty, like the sentence had been left unfinished. I read it again, thinking maybe my eyes had skipped something, but it was the same open, hollow, a silence between the words. I set the invitation down and rubbed my temples. There was no way it was an oversight. Wedding invitations are triple-checked, agonized over. Every word is chosen. Leaving that line blank was a choice. That evening, I called her. She picked up on the second ring, her voice bright. "Hey, Dad, got your invitation today," I said. "Oh, good, isn't it pretty?" "It is," I said slowly. "But I noticed something, the escort line, it's blank." There was a pause, just a breath too long. "Yeah," she said finally, I didn't know how to fill that out yet." I leaned back in my chair, staring at the grooves in the wooden table. "You didn't know, or you already decided?" Her voice softened. "Dad, I'm thinking about having Uncle John walk me down the aisle. You know, Mom's brother, it feels right." I closed my eyes. Uncle John, a man who'd never once shown up for a parent-teacher conference, who hadn't been there for her first day of school, who had appeared in her life only in scattered bursts after Linda died. "I see," I said. "It's not that I don't appreciate everything you've done." "Everything I've done," I said, the words tasting bitter. "Emily, I've been your father for 20 years. "I know," she said quickly. It's symbolic, blood and all that." Blood and all that. 3 words that cut deeper than anything she'd said at her birthday. I didn't yell. I didn't plead. I just told her I understood, though I didn't. When we hung up, I sat in the quiet kitchen with the invitation in front of me, the blank space staring back like an accusation. That night, I pulled out the cedar chest again. Inside, the folders with her name. Every receipt, every school form, every milestone I'd quietly documented. I ran my fingers over the edges of the papers, feeling the years they held. It struck me then. This was all invisible to her. The daily labor of being a parent doesn't make it into wedding speeches or printed invitations. It lives in the spaces no one sees, in the blank lines that get left empty when someone decides blood matters more than the hands that raised them. A week later, I got a follow-up card in the mail from her. It wasn't personal, just a general RSVP reminder to all guests. The escort line in her formal program had been updated. It now read, "The bride will be escorted by her uncle, John Whitmore." I placed the card back in the envelope, slid it into the drawer of my desk, and closed it slowly. And I began to understand, with a kind of cold clarity, that the day of her wedding would not be the day I had imagined for 20 years. It would be something else entirely. The vineyard was about an hour's drive from my house, but the distance felt longer that Friday evening. The road wound through low hills and early summer fields, the air heavy with the scent of cut grass. I'd been invited, technically, to the rehearsal dinner, though I suspected my presence was more a courtesy than a desire. I arrived just as the sun was beginning to set, spilling gold across the rows of vines. The main hall was all polished wood and glass, with long tables draped in white linen. I spotted Emily near the head table, laughing with her bridesmaids. She looked radiant in a pale blue dress, her hair swept up in soft curls. For a moment, I let myself see her as I'd always wanted to on this weekend, happy, ready to start a new chapter. But then my eyes shifted to the man standing beside her. John Whitmore, tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a suit that looked like it had been tailored for this very role. His hand rested lightly on Emily's back as they spoke with the officiant. I felt a muscle tighten in my jaw. I kept to the side, taking a seat at a small table in the corner. A waitress poured me water, and I busied myself with the condensation on the glass. The rehearsal began soon after, and when the moment came to practice the walk down the aisle, I watched John offer his arm to Emily. She smiled up at him, a smile so familiar it made my chest ache. It was the one she used to give me when I carried her on my shoulders at the county fair. After the run-through, guests mingled over drinks. I considered leaving quietly, but something in me refused. Not yet. When Emily stepped away from the crowd to check her phone, I crossed the room. "Can we talk for a minute?" I asked. She looked surprised, but nodded. We walked out to the veranda where the air was cooler, the only sounds the distant hum of crickets and the faint music drifting from inside. "I wanted to ask you," I began carefully, "why you didn't tell me sooner about John." She glanced at me, then away. I didn't know how you'd take it. Emily, I said, I'm not upset about him walking you down the aisle because I can't handle being replaced in a photo. I'm upset because I was your father every single day for 20 years, and this is the one moment in your life when that's supposed to matter in front of everyone. Her eyes softened, but her voice stayed firm. Dad, it's not about replacing you. It's about honoring where I came from. John is Mom's brother. He's my blood. I took a deep breath. Blood isn't what got you through chickenpox when you were 8. Blood didn't drive 3 hours in a snowstorm to pick you up from a school trip when the bus broke down. Blood didn't stay up until 2 in the morning quizzing you for your history final. She flinched slightly but said nothing. Do you remember the time you broke your arm in 5th grade? I went on. You were so scared the doctor would have to cut your favorite sweater. You cried the whole way there. I promised you I'd buy you another one just like it, and I did. That wasn't about sweaters. That was about keeping you safe. That was about love. Her eyes shimmered, but she blinked it away. You've always been there for me, I know that, but tomorrow feels like it should be about where I started. I looked at her for a long moment. Where you started, Emily, was the day you walked into that courthouse with a teddy bear in your arms, and I was there. From that day forward, silence stretched between us. Inside, laughter swelled as someone told a joke. Out here, the air felt heavy still. She finally said, I don't want this to be a fight, Dad, not before the wedding. I nodded slowly. Then let's not fight, but I need you to understand, some choices can't be undone. Tomorrow, when you walk down that aisle, you're telling the world who your father is, and I'll have to decide what to do with that. Her brow furrowed. What does that mean? I shook my head. We'll see. She didn't answer. After a moment, she turned and went back inside, rejoining the glow and the voices. I stayed out on the veranda, listening to the muffled clink of glasses, feeling the space between us widen just a little more. The night air was cool, but my chest felt tight, warm. I thought of Linda and what she might say if she could see this. Maybe she'd tell me to let it go, to focus on the love that still remained. Or maybe she'd remind me that promises aren't just about what you give, they are about what's given back. By the time I left the vineyard, the stars were out. The road home was dark, the only light from my headlights stretching ahead. Somewhere between the vineyard and my driveway, I knew. Tomorrow, I wouldn't fight for a place I'd already been told wasn't mine. But I also wouldn't stand in the shadows without leaving a mark. The morning of the wedding broke clear and bright, the kind of June day that photographers pray for. Sunlight streamed through the blinds, sharp and golden, cutting across the worn kitchen table where I sat with my coffee. The suit I'd chosen hung neatly on the back of a chair. I'd had it pressed earlier in the week, even though I knew I wouldn't be the one walking her down the aisle. Old habits die hard. I debated whether to go at all. In the end, I decided I would, not for her approval, not for the photos, but because I'd promised Linda I would be there for every milestone, even if my role wasn't the one I dreamed of. The drive to the vineyard was quiet, the hum of the engine a steady companion to my thoughts. Rows of grapevines lined the road as I pulled into the gravel lot, their green leaves shimmering in the morning light. Guests in pastel dresses and dark suits moved toward the ceremony site, laughter and chatter floating in the air. I kept to the edges, offering polite nods and half smiles. Some relatives hugged me warmly. Others offered that awkward brand of sympathy reserved for people they don't quite understand. Sarah passed by with a brisk hello, her arm linked with her husband's. John was nowhere in sight. I assumed he was with Emily, waiting for the ceremony to begin. The chairs were arranged in neat rows on the lawn, facing an archway draped in white fabric and fresh flowers. I chose a seat toward the back, where I could see without being seen too much. The music started, soft strings, the kind that signal everyone to turn their heads toward the path. Bridesmaids emerged first, each smiling, bouquets in hand. Then after a pause, the murmurs quieted, and there she was, Emily. Her gown was simple but elegant, the train whispering against the grass. Her hair caught the sunlight, and for a moment I forgot the ache in my chest. She looked beautiful, Not the little girl I'd carried on my shoulders, not the teenager slamming her bedroom door, but a woman ready to step into her own life. And beside her, John Whitmore. He walked with the steady, deliberate pace of someone aware that all eyes were on him. Emily's hand rested on his arm and she was smiling. Not just the polite smile she'd worn at her birthday party, but a genuine, open smile. I wanted to be happy for her. I wanted to believe that my absence in that role didn't diminish the years I'd spent earning it. But as they moved past my row, she didn't look at me. Not once. The officiant spoke, the vows were exchanged, rings slipped onto fingers. The guests laughed at the right moments, dabbed at tears when Emily's voice wavered slightly during her vows. I clapped with everyone else when they were pronounced husband and wife, but my hands felt heavy. At the reception, I kept mostly to myself, sipping water, picking at my plate. A few guests made conversation, asking about work, about David, about whether I'd ever thought of traveling now that the kids were grown. I answered politely, but my eyes kept finding Emily across the room. She was radiant, moving from table to table, thanking guests, dancing with her friends. When she danced with John, her father for the day, I felt something inside me go still. Later, when it came time for the speeches, I listened as her maid of honor told funny college stories, as Daniel's best man recalled their first meeting. Then John took the microphone. He spoke warmly about Emily's strength, her kindness, her resilience. He called her my niece twice, my girl once. Not once did he mention my name. When the applause faded, I slipped outside. The evening air was cooler now, the sun dipping toward the horizon. From where I stood on the edge of the lawn, I could see the glow of string lights and hear the muffled thump of music. Guests moved in a blur beyond the windows, laughter spilling out in bursts. I leaned against the railing and took a slow breath. This was not the picture I'd imagined when I thought of her wedding day. In the picture I'd carried for years, I was at her side. I felt the weight of her arm in mine, the small squeeze of her hand before we stepped into the aisle. I imagined Linda's face in the crowd, proud and tearful. That picture was gone now. But in its place, a different picture was forming, a picture of what would come next. Because while I could stand on the sidelines today, watching from a distance, I knew I wouldn't stand silent forever. Some truths needed to be spoken, some debts acknowledged, and some lines once crossed could not be uncrossed. As I watched the light fade over the vineyard, I knew that before long, Emily and I would have the conversation neither of us could avoid. And when it came, it wouldn't be about the wedding. It would be about everything. It was just after dinner when the photographer began calling everyone together for the formal portraits. The sun had dipped low enough to cast that soft, golden light that flatters everyone, and guests shuffled toward the big oak tree at the far end of the lawn, where a white bench had been set up beneath its branches. I wasn't sure whether to join in. Tradition told me I should be there, father of the bride, part of the core family. But the day had already made clear that tradition, at least in that sense, wasn't mine to claim anymore. Still, I wandered over, lingering at the edge of the crowd. The photographer, a young woman with a high ponytail and the kind of cheerful bossiness you need for hurting people, was arranging the first group, Emily and Daniel flanked by their parents. On one side, Daniel's mother and father. On the other, Emily and John. I stood there watching. My feet itched to move forward to take my place. But then I saw Emily glance toward me, just a flicker, a fraction of a second, and then turn back to the photographer without a word. "All right," the photographer called out, "let's get the immediate family for the next shot." People shuffled into position. I took a small step forward, waiting for my cue. It didn't come. Instead, I heard Sarah's voice, polite but with that undercurrent I'd come to recognize. Just the bridal party's family for this one. My step faltered. I froze there, half in and half out, unsure which direction to go. The photographer looked at me, her smile tight. "We'll get you in the next one, sir," she said. "The next one." I nodded, stepped back. My chest felt hollow, the way it does when you've been holding your breath too long. They posed under the oak tree, Emily in the center, John's arm around her shoulders. Her smile was wide, radiant. If you didn't know better, you'd think he'd been the one to raise her, to sit through every scraped knee, every parent-teacher meeting, every midnight fever. The shutter clicked over and over, and I stood there just far enough away that I wouldn't ruin the shot. When the photographer called for extended family, I joined in. I stood 3 rows back between 2 cousins I barely knew. I smiled when she said, "Say cheese," but it felt more like baring my teeth. Afterward, as people milled about, I caught sight of a table near the dance floor covered in framed photographs, Emily's life in snapshots. There she was as a toddler, grinning with frosting on her face. Emily on the first day of school, backpack almost bigger than she was. Emily in her soccer uniform, hair in a ponytail. Emily at prom in a dress I'd helped her pick out. In half the photos I was there too, holding her hand, standing beside her, laughing at something just out of frame. But as I scanned the display, I noticed something else. Those were not the photos the photographer was taking today. Today's pictures were carefully curated, and I wasn't part of the frame. At one point, the photographer called for just the parents. I saw Daniel's parents move in beside him and John step in beside Emily. The shutter snapped again. I stayed where I was. It wasn't about vanity. It wasn't about needing to be seen. It was about the quiet rewriting of history that was happening right in front of me. And for the first time that day, anger, not just hurt, began to take root. Because photographs are more than paper and ink. They are the proof we leave behind, the record for those who come after. And one day, when people looked back at this wedding, they would see John at Emily's side and assume he had been the one to walk the road with her. They wouldn't see me. As the night wore on, I drifted further toward the edges. I watched Emily dance with Daniel, with her bridesmaids, with John. I watched her toss the bouquet. I watched the cake cutting. All the while, I stayed in the background, clapping, smiling when someone looked my way. But in my mind, a different kind of picture was forming. One that wasn't framed in gold or displayed on a table. A picture of every bill I'd paid, every opportunity I'd made possible, every moment I'd been there when no one else was. A picture that, when the time came, I would place right in front of her so she could see it in full color. For now, I stayed in the shadows. But I knew this was the night that would change everything. And when it did, it wouldn't be in front of a camera. It would be in front of her. The house was quiet again. 2 days had passed since the wedding, and I still hadn't taken off the suit jacket I'd draped over the back of the chair in my bedroom. It hung there like a witness, the faint scent of the vineyard's summer air still clinging to the fabric. I hadn't looked at the photographs online, didn't need to. I'd been there, and the images were burned into me whether I wanted them or not. I spent most of that Monday morning at the kitchen table, a legal pad in front of me, the old cedar chest open nearby. The manila folder with Emily's name sat on top of the pile. I'd pulled it out the night before and read through every page, every school enrollment form, every medical bill, every tuition statement. I didn't skip a single receipt. It wasn't anger that made me do it. Anger burns too hot and fast for this kind of work. No, this was something colder, steadier. The same focus I used to have when building a piece of furniture by hand, measuring twice, cutting once, knowing that the way you put something together determines whether it will last. By noon, I'd made up my mind. I called Emily. She answered on the 4th ring, her voice bright but guarded. "Hi, Dad. Can you come by the house tonight?" I asked. "Just you." A pause. "Is everything okay? We need to talk." She hesitated, then said, "All right, 7. 7's fine." After I hung up, I made coffee, though I barely drank it. I found myself pacing the length of the living room, stopping now and then to glance at the clock. By the time I saw her car pull into the driveway, the sun was low, painting the yard in long shadows. She came in carrying a small bag, still in casual clothes from the day. "What's going on?" she asked, setting the bag on the counter. I didn't answer right away. I gestured toward the dining table where I'd already set out the manila folder. "Sit." She sat, her brow furrowing as she looked at the folder. "What is this?" I took a seat across from her, my hands resting on the table. "That," I said, "is 20 years of being your father on paper." Her eyes flicked to mine, then back to the folder. "Dad, what?" I opened it, sliding the first document toward her. Preschool deposit, March 2005. You wanted to try the program with the art corner. Linda picked it out for you. I didn't wait for her to respond. I slid another paper forward. Orthodontist bill, 2009. You hated the braces for the first 2 months, until I bought you that mint-flavored wax. Another, ballet recital fees, 2008. You quit the next year, but we kept the shoes. She was flipping through the pages now, her lips pressed together. I leaned back. You see, Emily, I kept all of it. Not because I thought I'd need to prove anything, but because I guess I wanted a record. Something to show you if you ever forgot what this looked like. Not the big moments, everyone remembers those, but the small, daily things that made up our life together. She closed the folder, her hands resting on top of it. Dad, I haven't forgotten what you've done for me. I held her gaze. Haven't you? Her eyes softened, but she didn't answer. I reached into the cedar chest and pulled out another envelope, smaller, sealed. I set it next to the folder. That's my updated will. She blinked. Your will? I nodded. It names David as the sole beneficiary of the house, the savings, everything. Her mouth parted slightly, but no words came. You told me more than once now who your real family is, I said quietly. You showed me at your birthday, you showed me at your wedding, and I heard you loud and clear. That's not fair, she said, her voice quickening. I wasn't trying to. You may not have meant to, I cut in gently, but intent doesn't change the outcome. You made choices, Emily, and those choices told me where I stand. She leaned back, crossing her arms. So you're cutting me out because I wanted my uncle to walk me down the aisle. I shook my head. No, I'm cutting you out because you've been walking away from me for years. That was just the final step. Silence filled the room. Outside, a car passed, its tires humming against the asphalt. Finally, she looked down at the folder again, her fingers tracing the edge of the manila paper. I didn't realize you kept all this. I didn't keep it to guilt you, I said. I kept it because it's our story, and it's a story I thought we both valued. But lately, it feels like I'm the only one who still reads it. Her voice was softer now. I don't want to lose you, Dad. You're not losing me, I said. But you've made it clear you don't see me as the father who raised you, so I'm making sure that when I'm gone, the things I built go to someone who does. Her eyes glistened. She opened her mouth as if to say something, then closed it again. I stood, carrying the folder back to the cedar chest. You can stay for dinner if you want, I said over my shoulder. Or you can go. Either way, that folder will be here, and so will I, at least for now. When I turned back, she was still sitting at the table, staring at the sealed envelope. She didn't touch it. By the time she left that night, we'd said little else. I watched her taillights fade down the street, the manila folder still resting where I'd placed it. For the first time in a long while, I didn't wonder if she'd come back. I knew she would, one day. The question was, what kind of daughter would she be when she did? 3 days passed before I heard from her again. It was a Thursday evening, the kind where the light lingers longer than it should, stretching out the day in that slow, golden way June can. I just finished washing the dinner dishes when I saw her car pull into the driveway. No text, no call ahead, just the quiet crunch of tires on gravel and the dull thud of the car door closing. I dried my hands and stayed where I was, leaning against the counter. She came in without knocking like she always used to. But this time, she didn't head straight to the fridge or flop down on the couch. She walked into the dining room and stood at the table, her eyes on the manila folder I'd left there since the night she came over. You didn't put it away, she said softly. I shrugged. Didn't see a reason to. For a moment, she just stood there, her hand resting on the edge of the table. Then she sat down and pulled the folder toward her. I've been thinking about it, she said, her voice quiet. About the will, about what you said. I nodded but didn't speak. She opened the folder and began leafing through the pages. Slowly this time, the preschool deposit, the ballet recital fee, the orthodontist bill, the acceptance letter to her university with the check stub stapled to the corner. You really kept all of this, she murmured. I told you, I said. It's our story. Her fingers paused on a faded receipt from the summer before Linda got sick. I remembered that one without looking. It was for the lavender paint for her bedroom. She traced the total with her fingertip. I forgot about this, she said. You were 9, I replied. Linda let you pick the color. She kept flipping. The stack wasn't organized chronologically anymore. It had shifted from my careful order into a shuffle of years and moments, but maybe that was better. Love isn't always neat either. Halfway through, she stopped again. This time, it was a copy of a hospital bill from when she'd broken her arm. I remembered sitting beside her in the ER, holding her good hand while she squeezed so hard my fingers went numb. She'd been more worried about her sweater than the cast. You stayed with me the whole night, she said, almost to herself. I've stayed with you every night I could, I said quietly. Her eyes lifted to mine, but she didn't hold the look for long. She went back to the pages, one after another. Birthday party receipts, camp registration forms, flight tickets for the trip to Washington, D.C., her senior year of high school. When she finally closed the folder, she sat there for a long time, her hands resting on top of it. The silence stretched, but it wasn't the heavy, angry silence from before. This one felt unsettled. I didn't mean to erase you, she said at last. I know, I replied. But intent doesn't always matter as much as the result. She nodded, staring at the table. I thought, maybe I could honor both sides of my family, but I see now that in trying to do that, I hurt the side that was actually there. I leaned back, my fingers tapping lightly against the arm of the chair. Emily, I've never told you not to know where you came from, but I have always wanted you to remember who stood by you on the road from there to here. She looked up at me then, and I could see the glimmer of tears she was holding back. I don't want you to think I don't love you. I don't think that, I said. But love has to be shown, not just felt, and lately you've been showing me something different. She opened her mouth, closed it again. Her hands tightened on the folder. I can't change the wedding, she said finally. I know, but I can change what happens next. I studied her for a moment. She wasn't making promises yet, not the kind I could build anything on, but there was something in her voice I hadn't heard in a long time. Not the defensive edge, not the practiced politeness, just the girl I used to know. She pushed the folder back toward me. Can I come by again this weekend? Maybe go through more of this with you. I'd like to remember some of these things with you. I didn't smile, not exactly, but something in my chest loosened. You can come by any time, I said. She nodded, stood, and hesitated near the door. Dad, yeah, thank you for all of it, even the parts I didn't notice. I didn't answer right away. I just gave her a small nod, letting the weight of her words settle. When she left, I stayed at the table, the folder still in front of me. The will was still in the envelope, untouched. I didn't know yet if I'd change it back, but for the first time in weeks, I didn't feel like closing the cedar chest. Some pages of our story had been damaged, sure, but maybe, just maybe, there was still time to keep writing. It was 2 weeks later when the knock came. Not Emily's light, familiar 3-tap rhythm, but a firmer, heavier rap. I was in the garage sanding down an old table leg when I heard it. By the time I wiped my hands and opened the front door, Sarah was standing there. She had that smile tight at the corners, practiced in the mirror, like she'd been told this visit was a good idea and wasn't entirely convinced herself. Sarah, I said, this is unexpected. Can I come in? She asked. I stepped aside. She moved past me into the living room like she owned the place. Her eyes swept over the furniture, the photos on the wall, the cedar chest in the corner. I've been talking to Emily, she began, settling onto the couch without waiting for an invitation. I leaned against the door frame, and she's confused, upset. She told me about your little folder and your will. She said the last word as if it tasted bad. Mike, do you have any idea what that's done to her? I imagine it made her think, I said evenly. It made her feel like you're punishing her, Sarah shot back, for choosing to acknowledge her real family. I walked over to the cedar chest and placed a hand on it. I'm not punishing her. I'm showing her that choices have consequences. She's an adult now. She gets to choose who she calls family, and I get to choose who inherits what I've worked for. Sarah's mouth tightened. You've been a good father to her, I'll give you that, but blood matters, Mike. It's who she is. She has a right to embrace that without you holding it over her head. I opened the chest, took out the folder, and dropped it on the coffee table between us. Everything in here is who she is too. Every scraped knee, every field trip, every rent check for her apartment at school. I was there for all of it. I paid for all of it. Don't talk to me about holding something over her head. This isn't leverage, this is history. Sarah's eyes flicked to the folder, but she didn't reach for it. History changes. She's starting a new chapter now with her husband, with family who can connect her to her roots. Roots don't mean much without someone to water them, I said quietly. That stopped her for a second, just a second. Then she leaned forward. Mike, she told me she's scared she's losing you over this. She doesn't know how to fix it, and frankly, neither do I. But I'll tell you what won't help, dangling that will in front of her like a threat. I studied her. It's not a threat, it's a decision, one I didn't make lightly. We sat in silence for a moment, the air between us taut. I could hear the faint tick of the clock in the kitchen. Then Sarah sighed, stood, and picked up her purse. I'll tell her you're still stubborn as ever, and I'll tell her I'm still her father, I said. She didn't answer that. She just walked to the door, her heels clicking on the hardwood. Before she stepped out, she turned. You know, Mike, sometimes love means letting go of the title you think you deserve. When the door closed behind her, I stood there for a while, letting her words settle like dust in a room you haven't entered in years. That night, Emily called. Her voice was quiet, hesitant. Sarah said she talked to you. She did. She thinks you're being unfair. I hesitated. Do you? A pause. I don't know what to think. I just know I don't want this to be the last chapter for us. I looked over at the cedar chest, the folder still lying on top. That depends on the next chapter you write, Emily, not me. There was nothing but the sound of her breathing on the line. Then softly she said, I'll come by tomorrow. When we hung up, I knew something had shifted. Maybe not enough to mend the whole break, but enough to bring her back through the door. And I also knew this. When she came, we wouldn't just be talking about the past anymore. We'd be deciding the future. Emily arrived the next afternoon just after 3. No makeup, hair pulled back, wearing an old sweatshirt I recognized from her college days. She looked younger somehow, but also older in ways I couldn't quite name. I was already at the dining table, the sealed envelope in front of me. The cedar chest sat open nearby, the manila folder resting inside. She came in quietly, shutting the door behind her. Hi, she said. Hi. Her eyes flicked to the envelope. Is that it? I nodded. It is. She sat down across from me. For a moment we just looked at each other, the envelope between us like a small wall neither of us was ready to climb. Finally, I slid it toward her. Go ahead. She hesitated, then tore it open. Her eyes moved over the pages, and I watched the change in her face, confusion first, then a slow, dawning realization. You're serious, she murmured. I told you I was. It's everything, the house, the savings, even Mom's things. David's name is on all of it, I said, and a small portion to charity, one Linda and I supported together. She set the will down like it was heavier than paper had any right to be. So that's it, 20 years and I'm erased. I shook my head. No, Emily, you're not erased from my life, but you've made it clear in words and actions that I'm not the father you want to claim publicly, and I can't pretend that doesn't matter. When I'm gone, the things I leave behind should go to someone who never made me doubt my place. Her hands tightened into fists on the table. I wasn't trying to erase you. I was trying to, keep the peace, honor both sides. I leaned forward. You can't honor both sides by cutting one of them out of the picture on the most important day of your life. That's not peace, that's surrender. And you surrendered me without even asking if I was willing to go. Her eyes glistened, but her jaw stayed set. So this is my punishment. This is my choice, I said, steady. The same way you made yours. She glanced toward the cedar chest. And what about all of that? All the receipts and papers? What am I supposed to do with those? Pretend they don't exist? I stood, walked to the chest, and lifted the folder out. I set it in front of her. No, you're supposed to remember them. Every page is a piece of the life we shared. That's yours to keep, whether my name is in your program or not. She stared at it for a long time. You think this will make me understand, she said quietly. I don't know if it will, I admitted, but it will make sure you can't forget. The room was silent except for the faint hum of the fridge. Outside, the wind moved through the maple leaves, a slow rustling that felt almost like a voice you couldn't quite make out. Finally, she reached for the folder. She didn't open it right away, just held it like she wasn't sure if it was a gift or a burden. "What if I don't want the story to end like this?" she asked. "Then you change it," I said, "but that's not something I can write for you." Her eyes met mine, and for a moment I saw the little girl who used to wait at the window when I came home from work. But then it was gone, replaced by the woman who had walked down the aisle with someone else at her side. She stood, tucking the folder under her arm. "I'll think about it. That's all I'm asking," I said. At the door she hesitated, her hand on the knob. "Dad, yes. I'm sorry, it wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic, but it was the first time she'd said it." When she left, I stayed at the table, the now empty envelope in front of me. I didn't know yet whether I'd change the will again. That would depend on more than words. It would depend on whether she came back, not just to the house, but to the place between us that we used to live in. And for the first time, I thought maybe, just maybe, she might. A month passed. Emily came by a few times, never unannounced, never for long. We'd share coffee at the table, talk about safe topics, work, the weather, a recipe she'd tried. Nothing sharp, nothing too close to the wound. I noticed she avoided the will completely, though she'd sometimes glance toward the cedar chest like it was something alive, watching us from the corner of the room. David stopped in one evening after work. We sat in the living room, the news murmuring in the background, and he asked, "Are you really going through with it, leaving everything to me?" "I am," I said. He shifted in his chair. "You know she's not going to take it well when she realizes you're serious." "She already knows I'm serious," I replied. "What she doesn't know is how I'm going to make it final." David tilted his head. "And how's that?" I didn't answer right away. Instead, I reached for the notepad on the coffee table and wrote down a date and time. "I need you here for this, both of you. Both of you, because Emily would be here too. I'd make sure of it." 2 weeks later, they came. Emily walked in ahead of David, setting her bag down on the counter like she used to. Her eyes darted toward the dining table where I'd laid out not only the manila folder but also a single, neatly typed page. "What's going on?" she asked. Looking from me to David, I gestured for them to sit. "I've made my decision about the will, but before I sign it, I wanted you both here." David leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. Emily's hands rested on the edge of the table, fingers curled. "I've thought a lot about this," I began. "About what family means, what it's worth, and how easily it can be taken for granted. And I realized something. What I'm leaving behind isn't just money or a house. It's proof. Proof of who stood where when it counted." Emily's brow furrowed. "I don't understand." "You will," I said. I slid the single page toward her. "Read it." She picked it up, her eyes scanning the lines. It wasn't the will, it was a letter, addressed to both her and David. In it, I laid out the terms in plain language. The house, the savings, and the personal effects would all go to David, unless both of my children, David and Emily, signed an acknowledgement of the life I'd given them, witnessed publicly and kept with the will. Emily looked up sharply. "You want me to sign something like a confession?" "Not a confession," I said evenly. "An acknowledgement that I was your father not just in name but in deed. That the years we had together mattered to you as much as they did to me, that you see me for what I was in your life." Her voice rose. "And if I don't, then the will stands as it is now," I replied. She looked at David, but he stayed quiet. "I'm not doing this to humiliate you," I continued. "I'm doing it because I've learned that silence lets people rewrite history, and I won't let our history be rewritten without my say." She stared at the paper again. "You really think a signature fixes all of this?" "No," I said. "I think a signature is a start. It's the first brick back in a wall that's been crumbling for years." The room was still. Outside, the wind picked up, rustling the maple leaves against the window. Finally, she set the page down. "I need time to think." "You have until the end of the month," I said. She stood, pushing her chair back. "This isn't how families are supposed to work." I met her eyes. "Families are supposed to show up for each other. I showed up for you. All I'm asking is that you show up for me now, not with words, but with something that will last." She didn't answer. She grabbed her bag and walked to the door, David following behind. Before she stepped outside, she turned. If I do this, it's not because you're forcing me, it's because I choose to. That's all I've ever wanted, I said. When they left, I sat at the table alone, the paper still in the center. I didn't know what she'd decide, but I knew this, whatever happened next, it would be by her hand. And if she signed, it would be the truest thing she'd ever given me. The end of the month came on a Sunday. The morning was quiet, the kind of stillness that feels like the world is holding its breath. I was at the dining table again, the single-page acknowledgement and a pen placed neatly in front of me. The cedar chest was closed this time, its work for now was done. At 10:07 a.m., her car pulled into the driveway. She sat inside for a moment before opening the door, and when she finally stepped out, I could see she'd been rehearsing whatever she was about to say. She came in without knocking. "Morning," she said. "Morning," I replied. We sat across from each other, the paper between us. She looked at it, then at me. "I've been thinking about everything," she said quietly. "The wedding, the will, the folder, all of it, and I realized I can't change what I did. I can't rewrite the choices I made, but I can choose differently now." Her hand moved to the pen. She uncapped it, stared at the paper for a long moment, and then began to write her name. Her handwriting was steady, deliberate, each letter shaped like she meant it. When she set the pen down, I picked up the page. It wasn't just her signature. She'd written more. "You have always been my father in every way that matters. I forgot that for a while, but I won't again. I love you." My eyes stayed on those words longer than I meant to. They weren't perfect. They didn't erase the hurt, but they were true. I folded the page carefully and slid it into the envelope with my will. "Thank you," I said. She let out a breath, like she'd been carrying something heavy. "Does this mean?" "It means when the time comes, you'll share what I leave behind," I said. "But more than that, it means we can start over if you want to." "I do," she said without hesitation. We spent the rest of the morning in the kitchen. I made pancakes the way Linda used to, flipping them onto plates while Emily poured coffee. We talked, not just about safe things, but about memories. She asked about stories from her childhood, and I told them all. The time she tried to give Benny the teddy bear a bath in the toilet, the time she asked if the moon followed us home, the time she stood on tiptoe to kiss Linda's cheek after her first school recital. By noon, the kitchen smelled like coffee and syrup, and the air between us felt lighter than it had in years. When she left, she hugged me, not the quick, polite kind, but the long, wordless kind you give when you're holding on to something you don't want to lose again. I watched her car pull away, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I was standing on the edge of something broken. I felt like I was standing on the start of something repaired. Thank you for listening to this story from Family Shadows. Family isn't always about blood. It's about the hands that hold you up when you can't stand, the voice that tells you the truth even when it hurts, and the choice made again and again to love each other despite the cracks. I hope this story reminds you to cherish the people who have stood by you and to tell them, out loud, what they mean to you before the chance slips away. Wishing you and your loved ones good health, warm homes, and moments of joy you'll carry for the rest of your life. Take care, and may your family's story always be one worth telling.